Welcome back to Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Bage from Fort Walton Beach PD. He has 26 years experience in law enforcement. We're here to talk about leadership and wellness. So welcome to the show, Chief Bage. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Paige, for having me. I'm honored to be here on your podcast.
Of course. And we were talking about it. Your last name, Bage, rhymes with page. So it's like
Correct.
synchronicity. It's perfect. I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. You have some really interesting concepts when it comes to wellness and leadership. But before we dive in, I was hoping you could maybe give us a little bit of background on you.
No problem. When I got out of high school, I went to the United States Navy for about just over 2 years. Then I did a year in the Border Patrol, but I missed working with the local community and really making a difference at the ground level. I enjoyed the work with the Border Patrol, but I wanted to do something a little bit different in law enforcement. And I saw my hometown, North Miami, was hiring, so I put an application in and got hired and basically moved back home and then did a 20-year career with the city of North Miami and rose up to the rank of assistant chief, spending a lot of my time in community policing. After North Miami, I came to Fort Walton Beach after they did a national search, and I've been now chief of the city of Fort Walton Beach for about 6 years. In my tenure with the city of Fort Walton Beach, I was appointed to the Criminal Justice Standards Training Commission for the state of Florida, which is the post board in Florida. I'm the incoming president for the Florida Police Chiefs, and I sit on the board of directors for the IACP.
That's amazing. I love it. And I want to dive into a lot of different things because you do have so much knowledge in what wellness looks like and the evolution of wellness. I'm curious to know, in the various assignments that you had, what did you learn in the context of leadership and wellness? Maybe some of the greatest lessons that you've learned so far.
But I think one of the greatest lessons that I learned about wellness is that a person is not just the sum of their components. It's not just health. It's not just mental fitness or spiritual or how smart you are. It's the interaction of those components. I mean, you could be great in every aspect, but still not be a great officer, still not be productive, still not be healthy, even though you're individually hitting each component. Because, like in so many other things, it's how those components function together,
Mm.
which really drives the person or drives the machine or drives anything that we do. And I think a lot of times that gets missed is how do these different components come together?
Yeah. Do you have any strategies on how someone can meld all of the components together to be the most effective?
I mean, I think that's the hard part. I think that's the $1 million question. And that's why we have podcasts and we have a wellness industry and everything else. And I think it's different for every person. I don't think there's a single path to it. And I think as an agency head, one of the things we can do is offer those different paths.
Yeah.
So we're looking to pilot next year two different coaching applications. One would be a virtual application where you can speak to a coach or a sports psychologist
Mhm.
for different types of performance issues that you may have, whether it's time management, physical fitness, other issues that you may have going on. But then another path we're going to go down is a completely AI application. So if somebody would rather go through an AI where they don't have to directly deal with a person, but still get insight into wellness, fitness, health, sleep patterns, and other things, then they can do that if they feel more comfortable just getting that information electronically. If
Mm.
somebody wants to have a one-on-one dialogue like we're having right now, the other avenue would be through the tele wellness application that we're going to get. And we're going to run both programs for at least a year, if not 2 years, to try to determine which program works best for our unique agency. So I think by experimenting with different wellness paths, you can try to find out which one works the best for your agency.
And are you finding, just really out of curiosity, and I think we talked a little bit about this offline, but are you finding that different generations maybe attached to different things? Like, are you seeing that maybe the younger generation is going more towards AI, whereas maybe the older generation wants more of that human contact, or is it a mix of both?
I mean, I think there's always overlap. I
Mm,
think when you talk about generations, you get overly vague.
sure.
You start stereotyping people within a certain generation, and there may be similarities within a generation because there's other outside influences that kind of shaped that generation.
Mm,
So the younger officers are more familiar and more accustomed with using technology and may feel more at ease by using the technology, but I wouldn't say everybody in the younger generation values technology. There's still people in the younger generation that value that face-to-face encounter or at least that tele encounter like we're doing right now.
yeah.
By having those options available, I think you allow your members to pick what is best for them. And I think that's what we have to do when we look at wellness is what is best for the members within our agency and what do the members of our agency want to see? Because when you look at policing, and I've seen different numbers on this, but it's fairly consistent between an average person witnesses about 3 to 6 traumatic events in the course of a lifetime.
Right.
The number for a law enforcement officer varies greatly, where in some references it'll be up to 100 or as high as 600. So even if you split that number in half and said 300, if you look at an officer that has seen 300 traumatic events in the course of a 20-year career compared to a layperson that may have seen two, three, four at best, each one of those is going to do a little bit internally to that officer. And
Hmm.
I can tell you as a member coming up through the ranks, the stressors are different at every rank. When I was a patrol officer, I can still visually remember every traffic homicide I went to,
Mm,
every death notification, or every scene that I went to that was a cardiac arrest or an overdose, and every death call I can still picture right now as we're talking. As
mm,
I worked my way up through the command staff, and especially being a chief or an assistant chief, I can remember every single time I had to call somebody in the office for a demotion, a termination, or even sometimes, unfortunately, when an arrest had to be made of an officer, those are stressors that are still like yesterday on the front of my mind. So the stressors change, I think, as you come up through the command staff or through the rank structure, or even possibly on assignments within the agency, from patrol to a special response team to a crisis intervention officer, that those stressors are going to be unique to each position.
mm.
And I think we have to look at it holistically to how do we have this almost a la carte menu where somebody in a particular role or a particular time in their career can find the resources that they need.
I really appreciate the perspective of not overgeneralizing when we're talking about people and when we're talking about wellness. And there's a few different perspectives that you shared that I wanted to kind of circle back to. So I go to wellness conferences a lot, and I do think that there is this idea of, well, this generation is this way, this generation is that way. And I do appreciate you saying, hey, like there may be some like similarities in the way that people learned, or, maybe that they're more tech savvy or whatever it is, but I do think that sometimes when you do that it's a disservice when you overgeneralize. And I heard someone the other day, it was really interesting, and they were not trying to be disrespectful at all, but I get it's to the point of the overgeneralization. They were like, yeah, when we talk about millennials we think they're lazy. And I was like, well, I'm a millennial and I feel like I work extremely hard. I work sometimes 15-hour days, not to say that that's what you should be doing, but I do think when you start to overgeneralize, it does make people feel a little bit left out or feel like they're judged, not based on their character or their work ethic or who they are, but based on, this oversimplification of a generation. And I've never heard this before, but I also think that you're completely correct that different people are going to need different things at different times in their lives based on what they're experiencing in this moment. And that looks different for a patrol officer versus a chief. And how can you adapt your wellness offerings and programming so that everyone at the various points in their life and their career have what they need?
And I think one of the things you wanted to discuss a little bit too was scale of agency and agency size and resources.
Mhm.
We are a smaller mid-sized agency and we're in North Florida, and budgets are a little bit tighter in North Florida than they are down in South Florida. And the two web apps that we're looking to go, both the AI and the in-person one, have a multitude of different things that they provide within their application.
Mhm.
And when we talked a little bit about generational policing, and I thought about it as you're talking about, probably the most concrete example I could give is like financial wellness,
Mhm.
where when you're an officer coming in, it may be interest rates, how to borrow money, how to effectively manage and budget. As you get towards retirement now, it's completely different. It's not how do I get the best interest rate? What does my credit score do for me and stuff like that. It's going to be how do I now manage with different sources of income, whether I have a pension, a drop account, am I going to look for private sector work? How does these changes come about? And that's only on one of the pillars of wellness, which is financial wellness. The same thing holds true with health and fitness and nutrition.
Mhm.
Just normally, as you go through life, all those demands are going to change. So, yes, a one size fits all wellness program is not going to work for the 19-year-old recruit
Mhm.
or the 60-year-old near retiree. And I think that's one of the things we really got to look at is how do we tailor these wellness programs? And I don't think it's an or proposition, that it can be an and proposition, that we can have tailored programs and also department wide programs. So we have a physical fitness program that we do department wide. And I think that's one of the ones that you can do department wide, but then you also have some tailored individual fitness objectives that people can take on throughout the course of the year. And by doing them together, I think you come to probably the best outcome you could with a wellness program.
Yeah, and I was really hoping that you could, I know you talked about different pillars. I was hoping that you could maybe dive into the various pillars that you guys focus on. And then you mentioned funding. How do you, as a smaller organization, find the funding? And what are you looking for as far as ROI? Like, how are you measuring the success of the things that you are doing?
Now, I think return on investment gets very tricky
Right.
because it's very easy if we had a factory and we're pushing out widgets and we say, okay, how many are good? How many have defects? But when you talk about wellness, and it's hard to really know what goes on inside any given officer's mind at any given time.
Yeah.
And you got to remember, policing is a unique profession because nobody really calls the police department on a good day. Every once in a while we do. Somebody wants to take us out to lunch or they have a celebration or an award. But generally, people call the police department on days when they had some type of negative encounter. Something bad happened to them, they witnessed something bad, or they did something now that requires police involvement. And because of that, that association imprints a little bit of negativity both probably on the officer and on the public.
Mhm.
And wellness, and that's the whole reason I think we're here, is how do we now overcome that negative imprintation that's been placed on us?
Right.
And how do we build that resiliency so when you do go to those 300 or 400 traumatic events throughout the course of your career, how do you overcome those? How do you learn to deal with the stressors, both in your professional and personal life? So when you go to that call, you can ensure that you are providing the most important response to that person because by them calling you out there, something major happened to them. And
Right.
how do you now ensure that you're providing the best version of you to deal with whatever that issue that called you out there in the first place is. And when we talk about the pillars of wellness, I think you have to have a complete person that shows up,
Mm,
somebody that, and there's no way to avoid stress in your life. Everybody's going to go through stress in their life. But how do we provide officers with the tools to best deal with their stressors so they can then help people deal with the stresses that are in their life? So we talked a little bit about financial as a pillar.
mhm,
Physical health. Physical health is probably one of the most important ones. That if you're not physically healthy, you're going to have problems with everything else that goes on.
mhm,
Mental wellness, resiliency, spiritual wellness. But then there's also things which it's hard to determine your return on investment is the morale within the agency, the camaraderie within the agency, the teamwork within the agency, communication. I mean, communication may not be a typical wellness box that we check, but I would argue that a agency that is on the higher end of wellness probably communicates a lot better than an agency that's on the lower end of the wellness continuum.
mhm,
So I think all of those things are pillars at which wellness are is the final outcome, and they're all symptoms of that final outcome.
mm. I love that you said that they show up as a complete person. I thought
Yes, I
that
think
was
that's
so
critical.
powerful. That was so powerful because it is. It that encapsulates this idea of holistic wellness, right? Making sure that someone shows up and physically, mentally, emotionally, they are there. And they're able to sh not just show up, but thrive and perform at a high level. And I think that's the goal.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, wellness allows us to have that empathy, that proactive community engagement. And I think you said the word thrive. It
yeah.
allows us to survive, but also thrive in everything we do in our profession.
And that has to be the goal. I have a lot of conversations where it is like we want you to be able to survive a 30-year career. And I think that that's true. But how can we take that a step further and say we don't want you to just survive this career. We want you to thrive in this career. And when you leave the career in your retirement, we also want you to thrive in retirement, not just survive retirement. And so I think it's first step, yes, we want you to survive, but then how can we also create resources and a culture within the organization for you to thrive? And when you and I talked offline, you have a belief that wellness should be a lifestyle, and that organizationally, if you don't provide those resources, that it's a failure on the organization. And so I was hoping you could explain, maybe how people can create that lifestyle of wellness for themselves and how an organization can also support that.
So I think one of the aspects and where that statement probably came from was we were talking about physical wellness.
Yeah.
And we talked about that we have a physical abilities test that we give once a year, we're required to give it once a year.
Mhm.
And we had done research from other agencies and spoken, and a lot of it is not research that you could do without actually speaking to the agencies and gaining some one-on-one information from the individual agencies. And a lot of agencies talked about how by giving a physical fitness test once a year, people would train about a month before the test, take the test, and then just dump any physical fitness regimen that they would have for the next 10 months. And then they'd start inching back into it. And then the month before, they would train again, barely pass the test, and then dump it.
Mm,
So, one of the things that we've done in our policy was we have once a year, it's mandated, but at the discretion of the chief of police, it could be run quarterly. So, at any quarter, we can announce we're giving our physical fitness test. And we have a physical fitness test that was validated for job performance standards. We get slack on both ends of it. We have some officers that are saying that it's a waste of their time to come out there because it's too easy. And then we have other officers that say, no, it is robust and we have to train and prepare for it. But we wanted something that was realistic and that was job based anchored in job status.
yeah.
So we have a very fair physical fitness test, And as of today, in the 3 years that we've run it, we've had a few people come close, but we've never had anybody fail it. And I
Mm.
think it's for two reasons. One, that it's job based and it was validated. And two, that we make it a lifestyle, knowing that it can be run every quarter. We give officers 2 hours a week to work out on duty with schedule permitting, call volume, and staffing levels. And we encourage the fitness by also incentivizing it, where if you pass the test in a certain amount of time, you get extra days off in that year. So
Mm.
it rewards them with a little bit of time off from work.
Well, you're creating a standard of at least physical fitness, right? And it's requiring people to stay in shape year round because they know that I'm doing like a quote unquote, like a randomized testing, right? And I thought about this, and maybe this is totally off topic, and you can just laugh at me if it's silly, but um, I used to be a professional skydiver, and we worked with military. So we would train military and teach them how to do more advanced maneuvers. And this particular skydiving facility worked a lot in military contracts. And for them, it was really important that their employees were operating at a high level because we were training people at a high level, right? And so they had randomized drug testing. And this is the only skydiving facility I know that did this. And by doing that, it held everyone at a higher standard to know that like if you're not up to our standard of what we expect in our trainers and our employees to work with this group of people, you're out. And obviously you're not saying like you're out, but it really did. It kept everyone in check. Everyone
Actually,
knew
Paige,
what
when you
that
say
standard
you're out, did they know that if you fail the physical fitness
was.
standard, that you have 30 days to come in compliance, or yes, you can be terminated. So, I
Okay.
mean, your example is pretty much spot on, and I think
Okay.
the principle holds true whether it's physical fitness testing for policing
Mhm.
or parachuting for the military.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you validating me in that statement because I was like, I don't know if this is totally off topic, but it really did. Everyone who worked in that space valued their job. They wanted to make sure that they kept their job and that they were able to perform at a high level. And so it did hold everyone at a high standard. And if there was someone who was falling behind, then, they were kind of weeded out in a way. So I really like, because, we have a lot of conversations that there really isn't, after the academy, there really isn't, a continued requirement for physical fitness. And so by you having these quarterly testing, it kind of holds everyone at that higher standard.
No, it does. And if you have no standard, then that's exactly what you get is no standard. By having a standard, at least you have a bar that one people can work towards, and then you can also hold people accountable. The other thing I think with wellness, and you talked a little bit about this holistic approach to wellness, is that a lot of places look at wellness in silos. Like you have wellness that is done only during wellness. Wellness really needs to be incorporated into everything you do in the agency.
Mm.
So when you do tactics, when you do training, in-service training, there should always be a wellness component built into that. Because a lot of times, and I think it's gotten better in modern policing, but a lot of times officer safety and wellness was kind of looked at opposite ends. That if somebody had a wellness issue, if they had mental fitness, and it was a sign of weakness if you ever asked for help or looked for help, or especially as you came up through the ranks. And I think we talked a little bit about it, that if your command staff is not willing to say, I'm partaking in these programs, I'm partaking in these opportunities, that I'm getting some assistance in coaching, that I'm going through some type of counseling or therapy,
Mm.
that we cannot expect line level officers to take advantage of the programs that we offer. That it has to be done from the bottom up and from the top down. And we touched on it a little bit that there may be unique programs in different levels or assignments within an agency, but the outwardness and the willingness to accept these programs has to be done at every level in the agency if you want your wellness program to be successful. And one of the things, and this comes from Andrew Gilmarty, he said it in the past, is that the general public looks at possibilities. You fly on an airline because you're like, the likelihood of an airplane crashing is very slim. I'm probably going to land with nothing wrong. At worst case, they're going to lose my luggage.
Mm.
In law enforcement, we don't look at possibility, or we look at probability. The general public looks at probability. We look at possibility. If one incident happened one time anywhere in the United States, some lady smuggled a knife in a cake that she dropped off at the police department, we're now searching every cake for a knife because
Mm.
it's possible because it happened one time. And that causes a state of hypervigilance.
Yeah.
And through our wellness programs, we got to figure out ways, how do we bring down that hypervigilance when it's not in a situation where it's needed? On a traffic stop, it's probably needed. As we're walking through the hallways of the station, if we're at a community event, how do we bring down the hypervigilance a little bit, but still maintain officer safety? And I think a lot of it is that dynamics between possibility and probability.
I appreciate you talking about wellness and training going hand in hand. And I've had this conversation. I'm really interested to hear your opinion on this. But I have asked this question before of, do you think that wellness and training will be one, that they won't be separate? Because in my mind, wellness is a part of safety. If you can make effective decisions, if you can have a more, I don't want to say like probability and possibility because now you're saying that and it's in my head. But if you can have a better outcome on the streets because you can make effective decisions, if you can calm your nervous system, these are things that go hand in hand with real-time training that you're doing. Do we think that eventually one day it's just going to be a part of training?
I think it will, and I think you already see it. I think when you go through different types of tactical training, they really harp now on debriefing. There's pushes for peer support teams. I mean, I think you see the integration of different things coming together more so than ever in the past.
Mhm.
I think you used to train strictly in defensive tactics, strictly in driving, strictly in communications. Now there's a lot of integration of training and tactics, and you'll probably see more and more of it. I mean, if you go to a certain type of training, that training has to focus on whatever you're going there for.
Right.
But I think on the peripheral, yes, there can be some time allocated in the trainings for wellness issues or issues that complete you, as we talked about, that whole person
Yeah.
and not looked at as much in a vacuum going forward. So I definitely think that's on the horizon.
And I think that if we can start to look at it more as physical training, mental training, emotional training, financial training, and sometimes it's the way you present things. I think there is still a stigma to the word wellness in certain capacities because I think that it does give this indication that maybe you're weak or you're broken or you're not whole. But if we can maybe position it as, and you said this before, you have coaching, you have training, like these are things that are helping you to be better at your job, at your life, to show up better for your family, to prepare better for retirement. And so I think if we can look at it as like, this is mental training, this is physical training, like these are things that are going to help you to be the best version of you, then maybe that idea of weakness starts to go away and the stigma starts to dissolve.
I mean, I don't know if betterness training has the same ring as wellness training, but I agree with you completely that it should be designed to make somebody a better person
Mm,
or a better version of what you are.
100%. I I know that we talked a little bit about leadership and this idea that leaders should feel comfortable communicating with their team saying, "Hey, like I'm on board with this. I am also taking advantage of these resources," and normalizing that. What stressors do you think that chiefs have specifically that maybe people don't understand? And how can we get chiefs to focus more on themselves, or I can even say leadership to talk, to focus more on themselves? Because I still think that we talk about siloed, I still think that there's maybe the stigma that leadership can't take advantage of these things or needs to focus on everybody else first and themselves last.
I mean, I think that statement is probably the key to it all is that everybody's concerned about their personnel.
Mhm.
But it goes back to that adage like on an airplane where it says put your oxygen mask on first before you put the oxygen mask on a child or person next to you. That yes, that you have to be able to take care of yourself if you're going to be taking care of others. I looked up after we spoke before about the peer program for chiefs that you talked about,
Mhm.
and I saw it was Minnesota actually passed a peer program into statute, and they're getting it off the ground for a peer support team for only chiefs and command staff members.
Yeah.
Because we have a general peer support and it deals usually with traumatic incidents when officers respond to traumatic incidents. And a lot of places, because I can tell you from being a member of the Florida Police Chiefs and the International Chiefs of Police, there are informal groups at all levels, at the state level, sometimes at the regional level, at the national level, of chiefs that do come together and will call each other either for mentoring or for advice. And I think it's done at a very informal level.
Mhm.
But I think it's probably one of the next chapters in wellness that if we could formalize some of these things that are being done at an informal level for command staff and chief executives. One of the things I get sworn in about 2 weeks to be the president of the Florida Police Chiefs Association. And each president gets to kind of get a overarching theme for their year as presidency. So it's in the past, there's been mental wellness, there has been membership drives. I want to make this the year of the member. And when I say year of the member, I want to look inwards and see what we can do for our members. How can we make our members' voices heard more? How can we provide wellness opportunities for our members? And look more at quality over quantity. Because a lot of times we push for membership. I
Mhm.
want to see what we can do for our existing members and make this the year of the member and really focus on issues that are directly affecting our members as my overarching theme. And I think it kind of plays into what you talked a little bit about is how do we now look at the heads of agencies or executives of agencies and what can we do for them and how can that trickle down to the organization? And I think it's probably something that we're at the very infancy at a lot of this.
Yeah, and it is so hard when you care so much about other people to have this mentality of I have to take care of myself first. I think that it's in theory, it makes so much sense. If we're not taking care of ourselves, how can we take care of other people? But I understand the challenge of that, of, wanting so badly to be in service of other people and you kind of taking the back seat for your wellness. And so I appreciate that focus of, how can we kind of flip that a little bit? How can we really instill this idea of oxygen mask first so that you can be the best possible leader? And I think that that can trickle down, like you said, like even younger officers can think about that. Like, how can I take care of myself so that I can, service the community better, so I can be there for my family better? And as you start to rise the ranks, it's that same concept of I need to take care of myself first so that I can be there for others.
And then maybe we dull it a little bit and we say, how do we take care of us instead of first?
Mm,
Because if we use the word us, it's a more inclusive term. So
sure.
how do we take care of us? And us would include the chief executive, it would include middle management, it would include officers. And as we talked about different pillars and paths to wellness, maybe we add that as a pillar too to say we need to look at it throughout the department at different levels within the department. And maybe it's not an area of wellness, but it's a path of wellness.
Mm,
And I think that if we're going to do it holistically, then yes, we need to include that in there to say, how do we take care of command? How do we take care of middle management? How do we take care of entry level officers? And then below that, how do we deal with mental health, physical health, and all the other different areas of wellness?
I love it. I know that you're really involved, obviously, with Florida Police Chief, International Association of Police. what do you think is the future for wellness? I imagine that there's a lot of conversations. I know that you're starting to utilize AI and different technology. What do you think is kind of the next step or evolution of wellness?
I mean, I think it becomes more and more mainstream as the next step of evolution. Because when you look at, you had early adopting agencies that really hit the ground running. I mean, there's some very good agencies that have very robust wellness programs.
Mhm.
I know you had Derek Miller, I think, from Irving, Texas on.
I did.
I mean, they have an outstanding, I knew him and I knew their previous chief there. They have an outstanding wellness program, probably a model wellness program.
Mhm.
I think the work that you do in getting podcasts out there with your company and everything else, I think wellness is becoming more and more mainstream. And I think we're past that critical mass point where it's no longer early adopters. Wellness is now a mainstream topic in policing. And becoming a mainstream topic in policing, it is now the expectation that an agency has a wellness program. And it's probably the outlier to find an agency that does not have wellness at some level. And I
Yeah.
think the true trick now going forward is how do we push the wellness programs down to some of the smaller agencies? We've hinted on that topic a few times throughout our discussion, but when you have agencies that have 10 people, 15 people, 20 people, how do you get a wellness program in an agency that is a lot smaller? And the majority of agencies in the United States are these smaller agencies.
Yep.
The vast majority of agencies are either under 35 or 50 people. I forget the exact number, but how do we now make it, if it's a mainstream concept, how do we develop these programs? And I think one of the things I started with is the availability of technology, where now we have the apps, whether it's the complete AI app, whether it's the virtual coaching app that's in person but still online, whether it's regional peer support teams that is not just for one locale but can service several agencies. Because one of the things we have to ensure is that each person has a path to wellness.
Yeah.
Somebody may like going to a peer. Somebody may think that a peer may not keep stuff confidential and they'd rather talk to somebody that is outside of the agency. Somebody may say, I want to talk to a completely independent person. Somebody may say, I want to talk to somebody that has at least law enforcement experience.
Mhm.
Somebody may say, I have no issues with coaching or mental wellness, but I want to work on my nutrition. I want to work on my spiritual wellness. And I think we have to have all those paths available for personal growth, but each one of those paths generally has some type of financial cost associated with it. And I think that's the trick. If you look from state to state, there are lots of states now that are starting to start with state legislative financial assistance that they're pushing down through grants or other funding opportunities to agencies. I think at the county level and even at the city level, there are various grants, nonprofits, or other programs that are becoming available. And the trick now may be figuring out what is available for my agency. How do I figure out where the funding is? What resources are available? How do I leverage those resources? As an agency my size, I could probably never have an in-house psychologist working for our agency because it just would not be fiscally conducive.
Mhm.
But can I leverage off a partnership between a few agencies? Is there technology that allows me to telecommunicate with a psychologist or a psychiatrist that may be able to provide services for my agency?
Mhm.
Are there coaches that I could not bring in, but now I may have access to through technology?
Yeah. Yeah, I like the think outside the box and see how, because there is a lot of conversation right now about like regionalization and excuse me, agencies coming together and kind of pooling together their funds to maybe have a wellness coordinator that handles both of them or a psychologist that handles, multiple agencies in the same area. So I like that approach of how can you think outside the box to create more leverage, but then how can you lean on each other to figure out how you might be able to go in and have access to it because you're stronger together financially. And you're exactly correct. Most agencies are small. And I've talked to a lot of police agencies across the country. I've had chiefs on that have a one-man department, and then I've had chiefs on that have 1,000 employees and everything in between. And there are unique challenges to every single organization, but I would say across the board, most of them, even the larger agencies, talk about how funding is a challenge.
Correct.
And they're trying to figure out like where can we even start? What can we do? And I think now, because wellness is becoming more mainstream, there are more options, and there's almost this like decision paralysis of like, well, we don't even know like where to start, what to do. And I was hoping that maybe you could give advice to someone, because there are a lot of agencies that do have components of wellness, but maybe don't have a full wellness program yet, and they want it. But what's some advice that you would give, and maybe some lessons that you've learned that they can learn from when it comes to just starting?
So I'll go if I can ask you a question first. Can I ask you
Okay.
a question?
Yeah, yeah.
So I got a question for you.
Okay.
And I know you've podcast, you bring a lot of chiefs on, you're a big player in the wellness market. How much cooperation or collaboration have you seen between, say, a police department and fire department, or a police department and the city as a whole? Because a lot of the concepts that we talk about wellness, and I know policing has some unique aspects, and we talked about the traumatic events and some of the negative imprintation that may come on policing. But some of the other issues have overlap with a city or county in general, and possibly with the fire department. Have you ever seen wellness programs that are designed city and county wide and not really driven by a police department?
I have, and I will be as candid as I can. So, um, there's a challenge, right? Because there are some cities that aren't supportive of first responder specific programming. And there's maybe a challenge in trying to relay the messaging to cities saying, hey, there are unique challenges within the first responder profession, shift work, the various, we talk about traumatic events. There are unique challenges to the first responder profession versus, a 9 to 5 city employee. However, um, I've also seen it, where they have banded together. So I want to say this like politically correct, but I also want to be like honest.
Oh, it's just
So
me and you talking, and maybe a
yeah, yeah,
few
yeah.
100,000 people listening
Yeah,
later.
no
So
big
go right
deal. No
ahead.
big deal. Okay, so the challenge is this. There's some cities that are resistant to funding or helping to fund programming for the first responder profession that's specific to them. And so then we have chiefs that are like, hey, like, we're okay if we include it for everybody. Because the city's like, well, we want it to be inclusive of everybody. And they're like, well, we're okay with that. And then the city's like, well, now we can't afford it. Now we don't have the funds because we're trying to roll this out citywide. I have had some cities that I work with that do roll it out for everybody, and that has been successful. We've also seen it on the flip to it, where if it's not first responder specific, then the first responders don't want to gravitate towards it, because if it's rolled out from the city and it's not something that's specific to them or speaks to them, then they don't want to do it. So I think that there are unique challenges. I've seen it successful, and I've also seen like kind of this like friction between the city and the first responder profession, because they're like almost like fighting each other to figure out how they can do it. I don't see a lot of fire and PD going together and pulling funds together. Usually that's separate from what I see. But I do work with one city that has both. So I've seen it all, but I think the biggest thing is city support, and the biggest like hurdle is maybe getting the city to understand that there are unique challenges and resources that the first responders need. And sometimes you do need programming that maybe isn't inclusive of everybody, especially if you can't afford to make it inclusive for everybody. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I agree with that, and I can follow your logic with all of that. And the reason I asked the question was when we may be a little unique here in Fort Walton, is that we talked about these multiple avenues. And three of the avenues we go down is the city does have an overall wellness program where the city has an employee assistance plan. They incentivize annual physicals and they do some other things as a city wellness. Between us and the fire department, there's a program called the Second Alarm Project, which is a nonprofit, and we've done some stuff with the fire department with them as a joint venture. And then we have our police department specific wellness programs, which talk about a lot of the stuff that we went over, that
Yep.
the shift work, the traumatic events, a lot of the stuff that's particular to policing. And I would say you asked for my advice on what you can do or how you start a wellness program. I think you have to be an opportunist and you have to look for whatever opportunity is available for you
Yeah.
because something is better than nothing.
Hmm.
So if you can't do it independently, and that's where my question came, maybe you could look for something that is a citywide project and get at least a foot in the door in the wellness hemisphere.
Yeah.
And maybe if you go with your fire department, because that's your closest neighboring second responder, because we like to call ourselves the first responders and then the second responders,
Yeah.
but at least we're both responders, maybe that's the avenue you can take. Or if you're fortunate, you can do it yourself and do it internally within the police department. But I would tell an agency is be an opportunist, be agnostic with it. Look for different routes and avenues. See if there are nonprofits in your area if you have no funding. If you have limited funding, see if you could leverage those dollars with the fire department or the city as a whole,
Yeah.
or look, like I said, for avenues that in modern times may not have been available with you have different technology applications now that might be able to bring wellness in. You can also look for wellness in non-traditional routes. A lot of banks or credit unions specifically offer some type of financial literacy that they'll go out and teach to the community.
Mm.
There are different groups in the community that will come and do nutrition training or fitness training. So it may be harder to develop a program if you have to use some of these one-off opportunities, but you need to be an opportunist and you also need to find a champion. I could tell you in my agency, I'm probably not the champion for this, but I support it and do everything. You need somebody that is going to take it on and work on it with passion and do everything they can to find the best program. So I think one of the things you have to do, especially as an executive, is identify who that champion is, who is going to be that person. And sometimes it doesn't come with rank, it comes to somebody that is passionate about the issue. And you got to look for that champion and then become an opportunist and look for whatever opportunities are out there.
Yeah. And I also think it's a really good, to your point of like, how can you get fire and PD together? You guys are obviously really competitive. I mean, you just said that. You're like, we're the first responders, they're the second respond, and there's always this kind of like competitive banter between the two of you that's really fun. And so what I have found too is if you guys can go in together, there's sometimes some opportunity for like friendly competition and things like that to like get people engaged and on board with things. I also like the idea of having a champion and someone who's going to spearhead it, but I also think there are a lot of strengths within an organization of people who maybe come from a background of nutrition, maybe come from a background of financial wellness, maybe come from a background of like being a physical trainer. And so if you understand the different strengths within your organization, sometimes you can pull from that and you have people that are excited about putting out a newsletter with workout plans or
Correct.
things of that nature. So I like that you said leverage what you have and try to get creative, understand the strengths that you already have within your team. How can you maybe partner with the fire department to have like some friendly, like maybe you have like a relay race or a basketball game or pickleball game or something together where you're getting people physically active and there's a friendly competition that comes together. So I think that there's a lot of opportunity to be creative with that. Um, the one challenge I think that I see is, you know, just getting people on board to take advantage of resources, because that's the biggest thing I hear is if it is something that is offered through the city, the challenge is that people don't use it because they don't feel like it's for them. So how can you relay the messaging that this is for you or this is something that's beneficial for
And I
you?
think that's where that champion comes in. I mean,
Yeah.
you need that champion that is going to go out there and live it, eat it, breathe it. And it's really just their passion in life.
Yeah.
And everything's going to have a different champion. I mean, traffic enforcement has a different champion than wellness and everything in the agency, if it's going to be successful, has some champion that is championing that cause.
Love it.
And I know we talked a lot about formal wellness, but I'm glad you brought up that informal aspect of wellness too, because I think that's probably just as critical as the formal wellness programs that an agency has.
Thank you. Thanks for the compliment. I
Oh, no
appreciate
problem.
that. I have one final question for you before we wrap for the day. What words of wisdom would you give to someone who's earlier in their career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier or something that's helped you along the way.
I mean, the one thing I would say is the world is a dynamic place. There's an old saying that the only thing that is constant is change.
Mm,
And there's really not a single path to any goal. And if you do commit yourself to a single path, you have to be prepared to change your goals along the way. Because something's going to have to give. Either you're going to have to change your path or you're going to have to change your goal.
mm.
And I think once you understand that, you're already halfway there. And regardless of what direction you take, there's one thing that you always have to do. And no matter how small the situation is, no matter how insignificant it may seem, you can learn something from every single event or every single thing you go through. And if you're willing to pay attention, those little things that you learn along the way can lead you down a new path. And that new path is something that is going to take you to probably a new goal. And you have to have that flexibility. Now, I'm not saying to be a wholesale sellout and change who you are, but as you venture through life, your goals are going to change a little bit. Your paths are going to change a little bit. And if you just pick up those little breadcrumbs that are left from every interaction you're in, you're going to be such a better person at the end of the day.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on and sharing your knowledge and insights. I really appreciate it. That's all I have for you, but I want to give you the floor if we missed anything, if there's anything else you want to say before we close for today.
No, Paige, I mean, I thank you for having me. I was a little intimidated about coming on because I was like, oh, how's this going to last for the hour and everything? But I think it went very well.
Me
I
too.
appreciate what you do for wellness and everything you do for law enforcement. And if there's anything I can ever do to assist, please reach out. And I think that's all I have.
Thank you. I appreciate it. We'll definitely stay in touch. And I also enjoyed this conversation. It went by too fast, honestly. I looked at the clock and I was like, no, I feel like we could talk for another hour. So thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.